Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown.
This very, very strange verse and chapter in Genesis 6, connects to so much else of the Bible and what has taken place in history. And what caught my attention was this very odd few lines in the opening to actually what is the flood narrative, and that's where the sons of God went to the daughters of men and they produced Nephilim, and in some translations like the King James Version it actually says giants instead of Nephilim.
When I pick up my Bible, I look at Genesis 6, that familiar passage in verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. I can remember 30, 40 years ago, you could read that verse, and it would just go right by, and it was just glossed over.
In order to understand the prophetic future, we have to understand the prehistoric past, specifically as it relates to the world before the flood of Noah and the activities that were taking place on the earth, related not only to the human race, but also to the fallen angels and their hybrid offspring, including the giants.
And then all these giants pop up after the flood, names like Abites and Emites and Samsonites and Raphaites and Anakites and on and on and on, all of these giant nations that show up after the flood, and then connect that through how it relates to end-time prophecy, fallen angels and demons. Jesus, when he was asked about the signs of the times, and he said it would be just as it was in the days of Noah and just as in the days of Lot. So all of a sudden now we have a possibility of Nephilim or giants and fallen angels and demons being very much involved as a major sign for the end times.
The Book of Enoch is a highly controversial and convoluted subject. Though the Bible reveals very little about Enoch, the writer of the Book of Jude boldly quotes verbatim from one of the works ascribed to him, a quote which is referenced as prophecy no less. It is therefore logical to infer that Enoch is in fact responsible for some literary work. In Genesis 5 we read, Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Aside from a few more cursory references, the Bible doesn't really tell us any more about Enoch. If Enoch, the seventh from Adam, is indeed the author of a book, it would have been written long before the book of Genesis, which is generally thought to have been penned by Moses. The writer of the book of Genesis, whoever he was, would have had no need to retell the story of Enoch had it been already recorded in detail and widely disseminated, especially if it were written by Enoch's own hand. It is plausible, then, that the book of Enoch may have provided the foundation for much of the narrative of not only the book of Genesis, but the entire Bible, both Old and New Testament, and may well be the very first, certainly the very earliest, record of human literature.
Now Enoch wrote this book sometime after the birth of his grandson Lamech and before the birth of his great-grandson Noah. And it was written for two reasons. One, to save his family from the great flood, and two, because the Watchers instructed him to. The Watchers. You see, no one knows how many angels there are, but there are many, and they all had jobs. The managers of the universe. And as the population of human beings began to increase significantly, several of these angelic beings began to take notice of something. The men of the earth had daughters, beautiful women. And these angels desired them. They desired children. They communicated to each other plans to take human wives for themselves. And during all this, these angels taught them charms and spells and the cutting of roots and trees. In other words, they taught them how to perform rituals. And of course, these women got pregnant and bore large giants. And their height was 3,000 cubits. Now, 1 cubit is typically the length of the forearm from the tip of the middle finger to the bottom of the elbow, which is around 1.5 feet. You can do the math. That is taller than the tallest building in Dubai.
There were giants recorded in every other culture around the world, on every continent. And was that just a coincidence, or was it telling the same kind of story? We have the sons of God going to the daughters of men, creating the Nephilim, which became the heroes of old and men of renown. And so now we move into the word Nephilim, which actually translates as the fallen ones. Well, if we look at mythologies from around the world, and people have probably heard, like in Greek, where we have the Titans, or we have the Anunnaki in Sumerian mythology. The Titans were two different groups. One was giants and one's the gods. If we look at the Anunnaki in Sumerian mythology, we have the same thing. So we have two groups. One was giants and one was gods. The second group, which is the offspring of the gods and human females in polytheist and philosophy and mythology, they produced earthborn gods. And we need to understand that the Nephilim were like a demigod in both the Genesis account and on all other accounts around the world. So they were part God or part fallen angel in the monotheist belief system, our belief system. And they were also part God and part human in all the other belief systems. So we have something that's rather unique, and it's a very consistent narrative around the world.
Also during this time, one of the angels that descended, Azazel, began to teach man how to kill. He taught them metalworking, how to make weapons such as swords and daggers. He taught them how to make shields and protective armor. He then taught man how to make jewelry and other ornaments. This unappointed watcher taught them the art of beautification and how to apply makeup. And this was the beginning of the total corruption of man. Some of the other angels taught men how to cast spells. They taught them astrology and the path of the moon. Think about it. Who do you think taught men how to communicate with spirits using rituals?
And as I was doing that research, I came across information about a society that everybody is familiar with called Freemasonry, that actually takes their prehistory legends all the way back to the same time frame as Genesis 6 and before, with another parallel account, albeit from a different belief system and a different perspective. And all of a sudden that brought the secret societies into this whole narrative that starts in prehistory, the creation and the rise of the Nephilim and their kingships, alongside the mystical religions and the secret societies that rose up around them, partnered with them, somehow crossed the flood, and continue to this day.
Now, this is in the Bible. By the way, the book of Jude quotes Enoch
Directly.
So what can I say? We're not talking about some fantasy here.
Yeah, and this was the common view of the Jews in Jesus' day. So when he would talk to them, and when Peter talks about the angels that kept not their estate but are bound in chains of darkness, this was common knowledge among the Hebrews of that time. And not only among the Hebrews, every major ancient civilization has a similar narrative.
Those dark angels, they were locked away in the abyss. And these are the same angels in the abyss that will be released in the end time. Okay, so now we have a sun-worshiping religion based in mysticism and the secret sciences and initiations and sacrifices, orgies or sexual perversion, and on and on and on, was all created for the flood. And so they needed to find a way to protect this information and get it across the flood. And they found a way to record the information in terms of what those sciences and religions were. Had created 9 vaults with like 36,525 books that were hidden away. And so that was how this information crossed the flood.
I think that we need to get ahead of this kind of information as believers, and we need to understand how it relates to the text of Scripture, and we need to make inferences based on that perspective and get a solid footing before we're told what these things are, and before this narrative comes out that is going to be a very delusive, deceptive narrative. And unless you have your footing firmly founded now, you're going to be in danger of being swept away, because the lie that's coming concerning these things is extremely, exceedingly potent.
It has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. He who has ears to hear, let him hear.